Millionaire Marries Mistress, thinking he's free, yet his heart is still stuck on his pregnant wife. From the outside, Bradley Green had it all: unimaginable wealth, a sprawling estate, a reputation as a self-made millionaire, but beneath the gilded veneer lay a heart torn in two. After a secretive whirlwind affair, he believed marrying his mistress, Kiera Hastings, would finally free him from the lingering shadows of his past. Yet no matter how opulent their wedding or how public their union, he couldn't escape one unyielding truth. His heart still pined for the very woman he'd tried to leave behind. And that woman, Jessica Hartfield, was carrying his child. This is a story drenched in scandal, betrayal, and the unbreakable power of love. Bradley Green was not born into wealth. His father, Gregory Green, had owned a modest car repair shop in Fort Collins, Colorado, and his mother, Mary, spent her days teaching middle school English. Growing up, Bradley was an observer, always watching, always studying. When he was just 17, he wrote in his journal, "I will rise, I will conquer, and I will never look back." This vow shaped the trajectory of his life. By age 35, Bradley had turned that youthful ambition into a tangible empire. He invested aggressively in tech startups, flipping his returns into even bolder ventures. Soon, he diversified into real estate, purchasing hotels across the country, even dabbling in a chain of organic grocery stores. His business acumen was matched by a magnetic personal charm. Everyone wanted to be in Bradley Green's orbit. This aura of success culminated in the acquisition of his crowning jewel, a colossal estate in Palo Alto. Sprawling gardens, sparkling fountains, and marble hallways that seemed to go on forever. He attended galas in tailored suits, participated in philanthropic endeavors, and sat on the boards of various charitable foundations. On paper, he was a man of impeccable reputation, a pillar of the community. Yet, in the hush of his newly minted mansion, a different story played out. Behind closed doors, he was caught in emotional chaos. Jessica Hartfield, his devoted wife of 6 years, remained steadfast at his side. They had shared dreams of starting a family, of establishing roots in that luxurious estate. But as Bradley's empire grew, the demands on his time multiplied. Hours at the office stretched into late nights schmoozing with investors. Eventually, there was less and less time for Jessica. That was when he met Kiera Hastings. She worked for a prominent public relations firm in San Francisco, assigned to handle the press for one of Bradley's product launches. Dark-haired, sharp-tongued, and undeniably alluring, Kiera turned heads the moment she walked into a room. But it was her unwavering confidence that drew Bradley in. She seemed fearless, a quality that mirrored his own ambition. In the early days, their connection seemed like harmless flirtation. A dinner here, an event there. Jessica noticed the subtle shifts in Bradley's behavior, his phone lighting up with messages late at night, the secretive smiles, the overly long business dinners. Trusting by nature, Jessica initially brushed away her suspicions, attributing them to the usual stress that accompanied big projects. But after one too many suspicious text messages, her anxieties began to solidify. Even so, Jessica tried to keep her marriage intact. The estate was supposed to be their forever home, a place to raise children and build a legacy. She believed with absolute conviction that if she could just connect with Bradley again, really connect, he would remember why they fell in love in the first place. Little did she know, a tempest was forming on the horizon, one that would tear apart everything she believed was secure. Not long after Bradley and Kiera first locked eyes, they discovered a mutual passion for high stakes. They both thrived in environments that demanded swift thinking and unwavering confidence. Their conversations went beyond business strategies and publicity campaigns. They traded witty banter about art, philosophies on life, and the thirst for success. Kiera confessed she had grown up in a cramped apartment, the daughter of a single mother who juggled 2 jobs. Bradley found himself relating to her struggles, recalling his own modest upbringing in Colorado. Of course, there were boundaries. Bradley was a married man. Kiera knew that. But the more they worked together, the more their interactions strayed from professional courtesy into intimate familiarity. A shared glass of wine after an event turned into a clandestine rendezvous in a hotel suite. When the public relations tour ended, their secret affair was already in full swing. At first, Bradley convinced himself it was a harmless escape. He was working tirelessly to maintain his fortune and prestige. He convinced himself he deserved a form of release, a moment of indulgence. Kiera was a heady blend of beauty and ambition, a living embodiment of the adrenaline rush he sought in his deals. Meanwhile, Jessica was at home, calling daily to ask when he'd be back, planning dinners that often went cold before he arrived. Kiera, for her part, was not content with being relegated to a discreet second place. She wanted more. She wanted Bradley to herself, his time, his affection, and his fortune. She saw no reason to remain hidden in the shadows. The longer their affair continued, the more brazen her demands became. She wanted to attend galas on his arm, stand next to him in the spotlight, and eventually be recognized as the woman in his life. But Bradley was torn. He had a comfortable life with Jessica, who was his biggest supporter. She was the woman who believed in him back when he was still taking out loans for his first startup. She was the one who had foregone her own dreams of opening a bakery to support his expansions. Whenever he faltered, her unwavering faith pushed him forward. Yet, day by day, his relationship with Jessica began to feel more like an obligation rather than a partnership. Their shared jokes lost their spark, and their conversations revolved around real estate deals and social events, never dipping into the emotional closeness they once cherished. It was into this tense atmosphere that an unexpected revelation would soon be dropped, setting off a chain reaction from which there would be no turning back. A silent tension hung in the mansion's expansive corridors. Jessica woke up one morning to find Bradley already gone, a half-drunk mug of coffee and a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter. Early meeting, back late. Don't wait up. It was the third such message she'd received that week. Loneliness was creeping in, but Jessica resolved to be patient. Meanwhile, Kiera felt her hold on Bradley tightening. Their liaisons became a series of stolen weekends at boutique hotels in Napa or clandestine flights to New York for meetings. Each time they traveled together, Bradley's excuses to Jessica grew flimsier: investor crises, product launches, unexpected charity events. Yet Jessica tried to remain trusting. She believed that if there truly was an affair, she would see the signs more clearly. One evening, Jessica decided to surprise Bradley at his office. She packed a homemade meal of his favorite pasta, hopped in her car, and drove into the city. It was after hours, and the office building was eerily quiet. She found him in his corner suite, lights still on, but he was not alone. Through the frosted glass, she glimpsed the silhouette of a woman leaning over his desk. Her posture was too intimate, her hand resting on his shoulder in a way that jolted Jessica's heart into her throat. Jessica stood frozen, half of her wanting to storm in, the other too terrified to learn the truth. Before her courage could crystallize, Kiera emerged, laughing softly at something Bradley had whispered. It only took a single glimpse of Kiera's smug, confident expression for Jessica to realize her worst fears were playing out right before her eyes. Jessica nearly dropped the container of pasta. She left the office building without confronting them, tears streaming down her face. She felt betrayed, furious, and yet paradoxically determined to fight for her marriage. That night, she called Bradley's phone repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. By the time he came home, dawn was already breaking. Jessica pretended to be asleep, heartbreak twisting her insides. Bradley, on the other hand, was completely unaware he'd been discovered. He believed he still had the situation under control, that Jessica was either too preoccupied or too trusting to piece everything together. In the back of his mind, he felt pangs of guilt. However, Kiera's allure was strong. She made him feel invincible, tapping into the same daring energy that had fueled his rise to wealth. But storms have a way of building quietly, gaining force beneath seemingly calm waters, until they explode in a tidal wave of repercussions. For Bradley, the tide was about to turn in ways he never anticipated. In the weeks that followed, small cracks in Bradley and Jessica's marriage became chasms. Jessica was done pretending everything was fine. She started questioning Bradley openly about his whereabouts, demanding explanations for every late-night text, every suspicious weekend conference that magically popped up. Her voice quivered with hurt and anger each time she confronted him. Bradley's first defense was denial. He insisted nothing was going on, that Jessica was acting paranoid. However, his patience wore thin beneath her relentless interrogation. Soon, he adopted a more aggressive stance. How dare she accuse him? Didn't she know how hard he worked to secure their future? He spun her suspicions into guilt, warning her that baseless accusations would drive him away. Jessica felt trapped between her love for him and the mounting evidence of his betrayal. In a bid to save her marriage, she reached out to Bradley's close friend and business partner, Harrison Lewis. Harrison had known Bradley since their college days at Stanford, back when Bradley was still a young man, brimming with unstoppable ambition. If anyone could talk sense into him, it would be Harrison. "I don't know what's going on," Jessica confided in a shaky voice. They were seated at a cafe near her home, faces hidden behind sunglasses and baseball caps to avoid any public scene. "He's changed, Harrison. It's like living with a stranger." Harrison listened attentively. Though not directly involved in Bradley's personal affairs, he had his suspicions. He'd seen Kiera's name pop up in conversation far more often than necessary. He'd also noticed how Bradley lit up around her, a spark he rarely exhibited in front of Jessica anymore. However, Harrison wasn't certain how to intervene. Bradley was a grown man, and their business partnership was thriving. Still, he empathized with Jessica's pain. "Jessica, let me see what I can do. Maybe I can set up a conversation casual, you know?" Guy to guy, he offered. Jessica thanked him, clinging to that sliver of hope. The hardest part was feeling so alone, abandoned in a house that echoed with memories of better times. Despite the lavish surroundings, she felt like a prisoner awaiting an uncertain verdict. But, unbeknownst to Jessica and Harrison, Kiera's influence was growing deeper than either of them realized. She was not merely seeking an affair with a wealthy man. She was on a mission to become Bradley's wife and step into the limelight. Each day, she whispered in Bradley's ear, sowing seeds of doubt about Jessica. "She doesn't understand you. She's holding you back. You deserve someone who truly matches your drive." In his heart, Bradley knew that Jessica had once been his biggest supporter, the woman who celebrated every victory and comforted him after every defeat. But that memory felt distant, buried under his insatiable hunger for excitement, novelty, and conquest. Like a gambler on a winning streak, he refused to walk away, certain that he could somehow manage it all without losing anything important. He was wrong. Jessica continued her daily routine, though each moment felt tinged with anxiety. She visited the local farmer's market alone, picking out fresh produce for a dinner. She wasn't sure Bradley would attend. She joined a prenatal yoga class not because she was pregnant yet, but because she had hopes and dreams that soon she might be. She had no idea how drastically her life was about to change. It began with a wave of unexplained fatigue. Jessica was normally energetic, starting her mornings with a jog through the estate gardens. But over the past weeks, she felt constantly drained. She blamed it on stress. Of course, she would be tired, given her emotional turmoil. But then came the dizziness and the mild but persistent nausea. Initially, she dismissed it as a passing bug or nerves. Then one morning, as she was about to step into the shower, a sudden wave of intense queasiness took over. She leaned over the sink, trying to breathe, heart pounding with alarm. That was the final push she needed to buy a pregnancy test. In the quiet of her ensuite bathroom, she watched the indicator bars appear. 1 line, 2 lines, positive, pregnant. Her hand trembled, tears forming in her eyes, tears of joy mingled with a deep dread. She had imagined this moment countless times, telling Bradley he was going to be a father, seeing the excitement on his face, sharing the news with family and friends. But now, with her husband's apparent affair looming over them like a dark cloud, how would he react? In a fit of conflicting emotions, Jessica called her longtime friend and confidant, Linda Dawson. They had grown up together in Colorado, moving to California around the same time. Linda had introduced Jessica to Bradley at a charity event many years ago. "Jess, oh my God, that's wonderful news," Linda said when Jessica finally managed to speak through her sobs. "But I know it's complicated. You need to tell him sooner rather than later." Jessica nodded, though Linda couldn't see her through the phone. She knew Linda was right. She couldn't hide a pregnancy, and there was no point in pretending everything was normal when it so clearly wasn't. That evening, Jessica prepared a simple dinner of grilled salmon and roasted vegetables. She set the table meticulously, lit candles, and waited. Bradley was over an hour late. When he finally walked in, reeking of an expensive cologne Jessica didn't recognize, he barely acknowledged her. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, muttered a terse greeting, and collapsed on the living room couch. Her courage nearly failed. But the baby, her baby, deserved to have both parents on the same page. Jessica steeled herself, walked into the living room, and perched on the coffee table facing Bradley. She could see the tension in his eyes, as though he expected another confrontation. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." Bradley's eyes widened shock, then confusion. "Pregnant?" he echoed, as if the concept was foreign to him. He didn't immediately rush to embrace her or celebrate. Instead, he stared, as though trying to piece together how this could complicate his carefully balanced life. Jessica waited, heart pounding, for his reaction. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally he exhaled, setting his whiskey glass down with a soft clink on the coffee table. "We'll talk about this," he said, his tone oddly mechanical. "But not right now. I need time to think." He stood up and walked away, leaving Jessica alone with her swirling emotions. She felt an agonizing stab of betrayal. He hadn't even asked how she was feeling, hadn't shown the slightest excitement about their baby. All the dreams she had of a joyful celebration, of shared excitement over doctor's appointments and nursery decorations, vanished in that single, callous moment. Little did she know, Kiera's shadow loomed larger than ever, and this pregnancy would spark the very chain of events that Jessica had been dreading all along. Bradley knew he should have felt happiness. After all, this was the moment he and Jessica had once planned for, even looked forward to. They had imagined naming their child after someone meaningful, perhaps his grandmother Rose or Jessica's father Arthur. Yet when Jessica revealed her pregnancy, his immediate thought was, how would this affect my relationship with Kiera? His conflicting emotions swirled into a toxic brew, making him restless and short-tempered. Kiera had become his addiction, a secret thrill that overshadowed any sense of morality he once held dear. Their late-night calls and impulsive encounters offered an escape from the responsibilities that weighed heavily on him at home. But now, Jessica's pregnancy threatened to push him into a corner. He couldn't ignore that a baby would change everything: his priorities, his time, and his public image. In a desperate bid for clarity, Bradley drove to his private penthouse in downtown San Francisco, a space he sometimes used when he needed isolation, or, more accurately, when he needed an excuse to stay away from Jessica. He invited Kiera over that same evening. Over a bottle of expensive champagne, he confessed the unexpected news. Kiera set down her glass abruptly. "She's pregnant?" she echoed, her eyes narrowing. Her reaction was far from elation. A child meant Jessica would always be in the picture, no matter what happened between Bradley and Kiera. The gravity of that truth settled over them both. "You don't have to be tied down to that," Kiera whispered, inching closer. "Don't let her manipulate you with this baby. We have something real here, something you've wanted for a long time. And trust me, I can give you everything she never could." Bradley felt torn, but in that moment, Kiera's words fueled his indecision. The possibility of being a father, of stepping into a role that would consume his time and energy, clashed violently with the image of himself as a free, ambitious man always on the move. Kiera was the new, the exciting, the unstoppable wave he had become addicted to riding. That night, fueled by alcohol and fear, Bradley made a rash decision. He proposed to Kiera. It was an impulsive, half-formed idea. He didn't even have a ring ready. But he found himself on one knee, champagne glass in hand, murmuring vows about building a future together. Kiera laughed in delighted disbelief, eyes alight with triumph. This was the moment she had been engineering from the start. When he woke the next morning, the weight of his impulsive proposal threatened to suffocate him. But Kiera was already making plans to announce their engagement to the world, talking excitedly about wedding venues, high-profile guest lists, and the kind of designer gown she'd wear. In the chaos of that morning, Bradley felt like he was watching his life from a distance, powerless to stop the runaway train he'd put into motion. He also dreaded the inevitable confrontation with Jessica. He was still Jessica's husband, for God's sake. His mind scrambled for solutions, anything to avoid the shame of a public scandal. Perhaps he could arrange a quiet divorce, break the news to Jessica gently, and handle the child's upbringing through financial support. He told himself it was the practical solution. It was also cowardly, but by then, cowardice had become second nature. Bradley decided to lay the groundwork for a divorce without confronting Jessica directly. He instructed his lawyer, Donald Whitmore, to prepare preliminary documents, hoping to get everything neatly resolved in a discreet manner. The plan was to present Jessica with a settlement so generous that she wouldn't contest. That way, he could proceed with Kiera as though Jessica were a chapter in his life he could simply close. Jessica, however, was no fool. She sensed an even colder distance from Bradley, a man who, in the past, would never have gone 2 days without checking on her well-being. She discovered that money from their joint account was being transferred to an unknown beneficiary under the note investment funds. Phone calls to Bradley went unanswered. Texts were met with one-word replies. She was a ghost in her own marriage. One afternoon, Linda Dawson paid Jessica a visit. She handed Jessica an article from a tabloid gossip blog that featured a blurry photo of Bradley and Kiera, arms wrapped around each other, leaving a chic Soma restaurant. The headline read, "Tech mogul Bradley Green engaged to mystery woman." Jessica's world froze. The rumor mill had gone into overdrive, claiming that Bradley had secretly ended his marriage and was preparing a lavish wedding to his new fiancée. With shaking hands, Jessica dialed Bradley's number until he finally picked up. She confronted him. Her anger was white-hot, laced with heartbreak. "How could you? Bradley, how could you do this to me, especially now?" Bradley's response was laced with false bravado. He insisted the tabloid report was exaggerated, that people were jumping to conclusions. But his excuses were hollow. Jessica could hear the guilt in his voice, the hesitation that betrayed his lies. Shattered, she did something she never thought she'd do. She packed a suitcase. She had to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of that house, from the memories embedded in every room. She called her parents, who lived in Denver, and booked a flight for the next morning. She needed space to think, to protect the tiny life growing inside her. The last thing she wanted was to be around while Bradley and his mistress paraded their so-called engagement. And so, in an empty mansion, Bradley found the dinner table abandoned, Jessica's closet partially emptied. A note lay on the marble countertop. "I'm done waiting for you to come home to me. I need time to decide what's best for our child. I never thought we'd end like this." Despite his grand illusions and bravado, Bradley felt a pang of loss reading that note. But he chose to ignore it, telling himself he had made his choice. Kiera was the future. Jessica would understand eventually. He convinced himself that she'd see reason, that the settlement would ensure she and the baby lacked for nothing. In his mind, money solved all problems, right? What he did not grasp was that some damage cannot be repaired with a bank transfer. And sometimes, the real cost of betrayal only becomes clear when it's far too late. Bradley's world spun faster than ever. Within weeks of Jessica's departure, Kiera had orchestrated an elaborate wedding. She insisted it be in Lake Tahoe, at a private resort overlooking crystal clear waters. The guest list was meticulously curated. Top investors, socialites, and influencers, people whose presence would catapult the event into the media spotlight. For Bradley, the lead up to the wedding felt like an out-of-body experience. While part of him was excited by the glitz and the promise of a future with Kiera, another part nagged at him with guilt, reminding him of the vows he had once taken with Jessica. That memory felt distant, like a faded photograph, but it still stung. On the day of the wedding, the weather was perfect: blue skies, gentle breeze, and the sun sparkling on the lake's surface. Kiera wore a designer gown that shimmered with crystals, and reporters snapped pictures from behind velvet ropes. The officiant spoke words that barely registered in Bradley's mind. All he could think about was whether Jessica had heard the news, whether she was hurt, or whether she even cared anymore. Harrison Lewis attended as best man, though he did so reluctantly. He tried to talk Bradley out of this hasty marriage, cautioning him about the ramifications. "She's still your wife in the eyes of the law," Harrison had pointed out. But Bradley, stubborn and blinded by Kiera's confidence, waved off the warning. They'd figure out the legalities later, he insisted. When Bradley and Kiera exchanged vows, the crowd applauded. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment for tabloids and social media. Kiera leaned in for a passionate kiss, triumphant in her victory. Bradley forced a smile, his public persona unshakable despite the battle raging inside him. After the ceremony, they made their way to the reception hall, a luxurious space bedecked in white orchids and shimmering lights. Champagne flowed, guests mingled, and the band played soft jazz. From the outside, it was a fairy tale event. But inside, Bradley felt uneasy, like he was standing on a cliff's edge, unsure whether the ground beneath him was solid. In the midst of mingling with well-wishers, Bradley spotted a figure lurking near the entrance: Linda Dawson, Jessica's friend. Their eyes locked. Linda shook her head in disapproval. She didn't cause a scene, but the silent judgment in her gaze threatened to crumble the protective barrier Bradley had built around himself. He excused himself from the conversation and stepped outside onto the balcony, the crisp Lake Tahoe air filling his lungs. He stared at the water, tried to steady his thoughts. He was a married man once again, but the ceremony felt hollow. He couldn't stop picturing Jessica, wondering if her pregnancy was progressing safely, if she was alone, or if she had found solace in her parents' home. For a moment, he was tempted to call her, to hear her voice, but Kiera's footsteps behind him startled him back to reality. Kiera slipped an arm around his waist, her brand-new wedding ring catching the sunlight. "Smile, Mr. Green," she whispered, "because we have a future full of endless possibilities." Bradley nodded mechanically, allowing Kiera to guide him back into the opulent swirl of their wedding reception. Yet deep inside, he felt an emptiness that no amount of champagne or applause could fill. Several weeks after the Lake Tahoe spectacle, Bradley found himself in Denver on business. One of his real estate projects was launching a luxury apartment complex in the city's uptown district, and he had come to finalize permits and attend a press conference. It was a convenient excuse to be in the same city as Jessica, though he told himself he was purely there for work. After the press conference, a sudden compulsion drove him to search for Jessica. He remembered her parents lived in a quiet suburb just outside Denver. Without warning, he drove through the tree-lined streets until he reached a modest house with a well-tended lawn. He parked across the street, heart pounding. As if sensing his presence, Jessica stepped out onto the porch at that exact moment. She wore a simple sundress, her belly now visibly round. Bradley inhaled sharply at the sight, an undeniable reminder that this was his child growing within her. He got out of the car, his steps tentative. Jessica's eyes widened, her expression a mix of hurt and surprise. She didn't move from the porch. "I was here for business," Bradley began, voice unsteady. "I wanted to check on you." Jessica's jaw tightened. She placed a protective hand over her stomach. "You're married, Bradley, to someone else. Why are you here?" He couldn't answer immediately. The guilt and regret welled up, nearly choking him. His mind flashed back to the wedding, Kiera's triumphant smile, and the rush of cameras. Suddenly, he felt the weight of his rash decisions crushing him. "I know I messed up," he finally managed. "But this is my child, and I needed to be sure you were okay." Jessica studied him, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, "and so is our baby. We have love here, support, everything we need." Bradley's throat constricted. "Jessica, can we talk? Even just for a little while?" She hesitated, torn between anger and the lingering affection she once felt. She stepped off the porch, gesturing for him to sit on the small wooden bench in front of the house. "5 minutes," she said quietly. They talked, though the conversation was strained and loaded with unspoken tension. Bradley fumbled through half apologies, trying to explain how he'd been overwhelmed. Jessica, for her part, listened without sympathy. She reminded him that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to mend. Still, beneath her guarded demeanor, a flicker of the old connection stirred. They had once been best friends, companions who dreamed of building an incredible life together. Now they were estranged, torn apart by betrayal. Before Bradley left, he asked her to call him if she needed anything: money, doctor's appointments, or even just someone to talk to about the baby. Jessica didn't answer, but the tears brimming in her eyes spoke volumes. Driving away, Bradley felt an ache in his chest that no luxurious sports car, no lavish mansion, no high-profile mistress could quell. He had everything and nothing. It was an emotional storm that followed him back to his penthouse, a storm that refused to relent. Back in California, Kiera noticed Bradley's mood had shifted. He was distant, often lost in thought. She tried to draw him out with talk of parties and investment deals, even suggesting they purchase another property in Malibu to host extravagant summer soirees. But nothing seemed to break his reverie. Kiera, aware that Bradley had been in Denver, began to suspect he had reconnected with Jessica. Her suspicion turned into paranoia when she found him scrolling through photos on his phone, pictures of the house in Denver, the porch where Jessica had stood. Kiera confronted him, voice tight with anger. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" Bradley tried to brush it off, claiming he was merely concerned about the baby. But Kiera's jealousy was like a smoldering ember, ready to spark a wildfire. She reminded him that he was now her husband publicly, at least, and that his loyalty needed to be absolute. Despite his attempts to placate her, the tension escalated. They argued late into the night, exchanging accusations and painful barbs. Kiera insisted that the child was nothing but a chain to Bradley's old life, a weakness Jessica was exploiting. Bradley, outraged at her lack of empathy, stormed out of the penthouse, slamming the door behind him. For several days he stayed at a luxury hotel suite alone, not wanting to face Kiera's fury. It was during this isolation that the weight of his decisions crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He had married a woman he was not certain he loved, hurting the wife he had once cherished and leaving her to carry his child in another state. His grand illusions about having it all, wealth, power, the perfect partner, were unraveling at the seams. Meanwhile, Jessica was trying to rebuild her life in Denver. She helped her mother bake cookies in the kitchen, played with her niece and nephew, and focused on her pregnancy. But late at night, she couldn't help replaying memories of the life she'd built with Bradley. She wondered if there was any scenario in which they could co-parent amicably, or if he had become too ensnared in Kiera's web. As these undercurrents roiled, both Bradley and Jessica remained unaware that a series of events was about to transpire, events that would bring them face to face again, forcing them to confront the emotional wreckage they had left behind. The facade that Bradley and Kiera had created began to crack under public scrutiny. Tabloid stories ramped up, questioning the legality of their union since Bradley was still technically married to Jessica. Whispers of bigamy circulated among high society circles. Bradley's business partners grew uneasy, worried that the negative press would scare off investors. In the midst of this media circus, a shocking revelation emerged. Kiera had been funneling money from one of Bradley's charitable foundations into a personal account. It started as small amounts: trips, new wardrobe additions, luxury spa appointments. But over time, the numbers ballooned. An accountant named Kenneth Hong uncovered inconsistencies and traced them back to Kiera's private accounts. When Bradley was informed of this, his first reaction was disbelief. Kiera was cunning, yes, but she was also supposedly in love with him. Why would she risk everything by siphoning money from a charity that bore his name? He confronted her in a rage, demanding answers. Kiera broke down, insisting it was a misunderstanding. She claimed she was merely borrowing against future funds, that she had intended to pay it back. But her explanations were thin and the evidence overwhelming. Furious, Bradley demanded she cease all involvement in his charitable affairs and threatened legal action if she didn't rectify the situation immediately. But Kiera was not the type to quietly accept blame. She fired back with accusations of her own, accusing Bradley of withholding financial control from her, of never truly trusting her. In her mind, if she was his wife, she deserved access to all aspects of his fortune. The argument exploded into a vicious shouting match, culminating in Kiera storming out of their penthouse, vowing revenge if Bradley dared to embarrass her publicly. Within days, the scandal dominated business headlines. Investors pulled out of prospective deals, fearful of negative publicity. The once pristine image of Bradley Green began to tarnish. Even Harrison Lewis, who had tried to protect Bradley from his own self-destructive choices, distanced himself to safeguard their mutual ventures. Bradley felt his empire teetering. All the deals, the glitz, the success, it was unraveling just as quickly as he had built it. Overnight, the man who once appeared untouchable was thrust into crisis management mode, juggling press releases, legal consultations, and damage control. Amid this chaos, a thought persisted in the back of his mind: Jessica. She had never once asked for anything beyond support and love. She had stuck by him through every high and low, without ever stooping to manipulation or theft. The contrast between her and Kiera was stark, and it stung him to realize how far he had strayed from the woman who truly cared about him. In Denver, Jessica's pregnancy advanced steadily. She battled morning sickness, mood swings, and the usual fears of impending motherhood. But she also wrestled with deeper worries: her financial security, her emotional well-being, and whether she should legally cut ties with Bradley for good. Her father, Gregory Hartfield, a retired police officer, urged her to secure a lawyer and protect herself. "You can't trust him anymore, sweetheart," he warned, "not after all he's done." Jessica recognized her father's concern came from a place of love, but she also knew that despite Bradley's betrayal, she wanted their child to have a relationship with its father. Assuming Bradley could prove himself worthy, she began consulting with an attorney named Susan Holmes, who specialized in family law. Susan was compassionate but frank. She advised Jessica to consider filing for divorce and seeking child support. "It's your right," Susan reminded her. "No matter what he's done, your child deserves financial security." Night after night, Jessica lay in bed, turning the possibilities over in her mind. There was a time when she and Bradley had planned to be parents together, reading parenting books, decorating a nursery, discussing names. That vision now felt like a dream turned nightmare. However, the lines of communication opened slightly when Bradley began sending checks to cover medical expenses, accompanied by short notes asking how she was feeling. Jessica didn't know if these gestures came from genuine concern or simple guilt. She cashed the checks but never responded. She wasn't ready for a direct confrontation. Not yet. The emotional toll weighed heavily. She felt lonely, even in the comfort of her parents' home. Friends and family tried to cheer her up, throwing a small baby shower where she received sweet gifts like knitted blankets and onesies. But Jessica couldn't fully celebrate, haunted by the knowledge that the father of her child was embroiled in scandal, far away in California. Little did she know, Bradley's entire world was about to collapse, and fate would push them onto the same path once more, for better or worse. Bradley's downfall came swiftly. As the scandal with Kiera's embezzlement gained traction, more of his business partners started backing out. Lawsuits from disgruntled investors began piling up. His reputation was in tatters, and the press had a field day chronicling his fall from grace. From rags to riches to ruin, one headline blared. Desperate to salvage something, Bradley tried to distance himself legally from Kiera, claiming her actions were her own. But as his attorneys dug deeper, they discovered more evidence that Kiera had long been conspiring to secure a massive payout should Bradley cut her off. She had meticulously collected proof of their affair, including text messages and emails, some of which implicated Bradley in unethical practices. When the gravity of her manipulations hit home, Bradley felt physically ill. He had allowed his lust and arrogance to blind him, handing over control of his life to someone who saw him as a stepping stone to her own fortune and fame. The final straw came when Kiera filed a high-profile lawsuit against him, alleging emotional abuse and financial deception. She sought to portray herself as a victim, a woman whose wealthy husband had used and then discarded her. Though many found her claims dubious, the public couldn't resist the drama, and the court of public opinion continued to erode Bradley's once sterling image. Late one night, after another grueling meeting with his legal team, Bradley sat alone in the empty penthouse. He gazed at the city lights, flickering like fading dreams, and realized he had lost nearly everything that truly mattered. Jessica, once his anchor, was gone. His unborn child was growing miles away, likely never to witness the empire he had built. His associates and friends had all but abandoned him. Worst of all, he recognized that he had done it to himself. He scrolled through the contacts on his phone, pausing at Jessica's name. His finger hovered over the call button. Finally, with a deep breath, he pressed dial. The phone rang, each tone echoing through his hollow sense of regret. He was certain she wouldn't pick up, but to his surprise, on the fifth ring she answered, a moment of silence. Then Jessica's voice, quiet and wary, "Hello, Bradley." Words failed him at first. Then he spoke, voice trembling with humility. "Jessica, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need to see you." I need to apologize, and I need to know how you and the baby are doing." Jessica's heart pounded. She had sworn to keep her distance, to shield herself and her baby from the turmoil Bradley carried. But something in his voice made her pause. It wasn't the brash, overly confident Bradley she knew. It was a man who sounded broken, desperate, and genuinely remorseful. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet him. She didn't promise forgiveness. She didn't promise anything except a brief conversation. It was all Bradley needed to book the next flight to Denver, hoping to salvage what little remained. Jessica chose a quiet cafe in downtown Denver for their meeting. She arrived first, settled into a corner table, and tried to steady her nerves. When Bradley walked in, she barely recognized him. Gone was the assured stride, the tailored suit exuding dominance. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slightly slumped. He approached the table, hesitating before sitting down. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," Jessica replied, her heart a mix of sympathy and anger. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Bradley began, tears threatening to spill from his eyes. He confessed everything, his affair with Kiera, how it escalated, how her ambition and his ego fed each other. He spoke of the sham wedding and how he now faced lawsuits, public disgrace, and financial havoc. Above all, he expressed regret for betraying Jessica, for breaking the trust she had so freely given him. Jessica listened in silence, tears brimming in her own eyes. She couldn't deny the pain he had caused, but seeing him so genuinely remorseful stirred conflicting emotions. "Why did you do it?" she finally asked, voice trembling. "Why throw away what we had?" He inhaled a shaky breath. "I don't know. I was caught up in success, in greed, in the thrill. I was stupid, selfish. And I hurt you, the one person who never deserved it." The conversation stretched for nearly 2 hours, weaving through anger, sadness, and raw honesty. Jessica didn't forgive him instantly. Her wounds were too deep for that. But she allowed him to explain, and for the first time she saw in him a glimmer of humility and growth. Before they parted, Bradley asked if he could attend a doctor's appointment with her. He wanted to be there for the baby, at least in some capacity. Jessica, though hesitant, agreed to let him come. The next day, they went to her obstetrician together. Sitting in the waiting room, Jessica watched Bradley fidget nervously. When they finally saw the ultrasound and the tiny heartbeat flickered on the screen, Bradley's tears flowed without restraint. Jessica looked at him, and for a brief moment, memories of their early love resurfaced: the late-night drives, the laughter over cheap pizza, the unwavering support in one another's ambitions. As they stepped outside the clinic, Bradley breathed in the crisp Denver air. "Thank you for letting me be here," he whispered, voice raw with gratitude. Jessica offered a small nod. She felt a mixture of relief and caution. She had opened a door, but the path to true healing remained uncertain. Bradley remained in Denver for a week, attending a few more prenatal appointments and meeting Jessica's parents. The tension in the Hartfield household was palpable. Jessica's father remained distant, his protective instincts on high alert. But he tolerated Bradley's presence for his daughter's sake, especially because the baby's birth was imminent. During that week, Bradley poured his soul out to Jessica, telling her how he intended to dissolve the sham marriage with Kiera and fight her lawsuits vigorously. He was ready to liquidate some of his assets, to do whatever it took to secure a future for their child. Even if Jessica never wanted him back, he was determined to at least be a responsible father. Jessica softened as she saw the effort he was making, but she remained cautious. She had borne immense heartbreak and betrayal. Forgiving him completely was a monumental step that she wasn't sure she could take yet. Still, she recognized the difference between the arrogant man who had walked out on her and the humbled one standing before her now. By the time Bradley returned to California, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that wasn't solely tied to ego or wealth. He threw himself into damage control, working with accountants and attorneys to settle matters legally with Kiera and the investors. The road was treacherous court battles, public scrutiny, financial setbacks, but he persevered, guided by the vision of being a man worthy of Jessica and their child. Months later, on a sunny afternoon in Denver, Jessica went into labor. Bradley received the call and immediately boarded a plane, arriving just in time to hold Jessica's hand in the delivery room. After hours of labor, their daughter, Lily Hartfield Green, came into the world pink-cheeked, wailing and perfect. Tears of joy streamed down both parents' faces, their hearts melting at the new life they had created. In that moment, amidst the medical beeps and the nurse's busy footsteps, the past drama fell away. Bradley held Lily carefully, promising silently that he would never again let his pride and ambition eclipse the people who truly mattered. Jessica watched him cradle their daughter, and though her trust wasn't instantly restored, her heart cracked open a fraction, allowing hope to enter. Over the following weeks, Bradley stayed in Denver, supporting Jessica as she recovered and helping with midnight feedings and diaper changes. They took slow walks around the neighborhood with Lily in a stroller, talking about a future that looked vastly different from the one they had imagined years ago, but was possibly richer in understanding and compassion. Eventually, Bradley would have to return to California to rebuild his business and finalize his legal battles. Jessica was not yet sure if she would join him or if she preferred to remain in Denver near her parents. But they had reached a place of cautious reconciliation, a fragile bridge that could bear the weight of second chances if both of them continued to work on their flaws and fears. And so, in a quiet house filled with the soft sounds of a newborn, the seeds of a new beginning were sown. The road ahead was far from certain, but for the first time in a long while, it was lined with faith, humility, and a renewed commitment to love. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of love, betrayal, and redemption. Bradley's story shows us that no amount of wealth or status can shield a person from the consequences of selfish choices. But it also reminds us that second chances can bloom in the most unexpected ways if hearts are open to genuine change. Jessica's journey, marked by heartbreak and resilience, offers hope that trust, while fragile, can be rebuilt through patience, honesty, and shared responsibility. We've witnessed a couple tested by scandal and tragedy, yet willing to fight for a new beginning, especially for the sake of the innocent life they brought into the world. If this story moved you, taught you something about love or forgiveness, or simply kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, real-life fiction stories. Your support makes all the difference.